We have a lot to get through on today's little mini chat, but I just wanted to take a second to acknowledge, in case any of you noticed, I don't think anyone really did, to be honest, except maybe like the 10,000 people that unfollowed me, which definitely hurt my feelings at times, but we're working on that. I took a big break from Jar. It wasn't intended to be a big break. I actually took a bit of time to like figure out like what I wanted, how I wanted to say it, how I could serve you guys better, because I found something happening a lot. And obviously it's Instagram, obviously it's TikTok. It's very obvious that this is what happens. But I find that like the more outrageous or the more controversial your opinion, then the better views and stuff you get, which if you're genuinely someone like myself, who believes that like on this flying rock through space, my purpose is to help people with their relationships, then that's very hard and very contradicting, because in order for me to do that, I have to sometimes say things that aren't actually going to serve you very well. So I didn't want to play that game. I wanted to take some time and figure out like how I could deliver my little finesse on things, which I really think is now helping people who didn't have healthy, secure role models growing up, like moi, really define for them what healthy love looks like. Because when you didn't grow up with healthy relationship models, you spend a lot of time going through a process of trial and error, and you start to unlearn some patterns and learn some new skills, but then you get real life experience by going out and dating people and figuring out whether or not that's right, or how it balances, and like what's the homeostasis of these healthy relationships. And it can be a very isolating and painful process, because you can make some mistakes and definitely pull the gun too soon and get hurt. And if I can erase any of that and actually sit with you guys in the mud a little bit and be like, hey, this is the research, this is what I learned on my journey, this is like what I would recommend to take some steps, then that's a winning combination for you guys, I think. I do have a lot to go over in terms of talking about secure attachment, and I also want to give you guys some takeaways so that you guys can actually go and embody some of this stuff, because the last thing we need is for you guys to learn more information and not know how to put it into action, because I think having awareness and having information and doing the research and understanding attachment styles is one key part, but if you don't know how to embody that information, then it doesn't matter. Like when you're triggered, when you're in the thick of it, you're still going to resort to the same behaviors. So we're going to give you guys some really good tips on how to do that today. This space, by the way, you cannot judge me as a relationship counselor. This is our safe space, because I am going to say things and be myself a lot more here, and also drink my Red Bull at 10 a.m. in the morning, which you shouldn't do, but I am, because I'm going to Fiji in 48 hours and I have a lot to do. Probably wasn't high on my priority list, but I really wanted to do it. So whoopsies. If you're someone that's here and you're basically like, man, I don't get it, because I don't necessarily resonate with the fact of having like childhood trauma, or I don't resonate with having like these really bad experiences, but I'm suffering so much with anxious attachment or avoidant attachment, I want to teach you about something, and that is big T and little t trauma. Big T trauma is a lot of what people think of trauma. They think like going to this war, or going and having this really bad car accident, or there's this one defining incident where we can go, like that situation pushed me way outside my window of tolerance. I know what I'm working with and I know how it's impacted me. And then we have on the other side is little t trauma, because you have no idea what really caused little t trauma, but you just know that you're seeing it with your relationships not being the way you want it to be, your nervous system not being the way you want it to be. Like it's basically got its grip on you. And a lot of the time, little t trauma comes from things like not having emotionally attuned parents, or things that could have happened that couldn't happen. For example, wow, this is like the first one we're doing, and I'm going to go actually really deep with this. I remember like as a child, like always wanting a hug and like always wanting someone to ask how I felt, because we just didn't talk about how we felt. Like there was care and there was other things, but like there was never like that real emotional attunement. So I think that for me, combined with a lot of big T trauma that I had, created a little cascade effect for me. I had just for the record, a really bad run with attachment styles. And this is genuinely why I believe it's my purpose. It's probably some form of coping mechanism, but that's for me and my therapist. But I grew up and I didn't have like the best relationship models or the best childhood or the best understanding when it came to these things. And it was very confusing for me. And ultimately, I ended up with like this attachment style where I was so heavily anxiously attached, because it's a pendulum, right? So it's like you can be like the extreme, or you can be like a little bit anxious attachment. They're not always necessarily the same thing. But I was so anxiously attached that like I would get triggered and I would ultimately try to unalive myself, which is insane. Like I can't even fathom being that girl anymore. But once I kind of healed all that, I went to really like strong avoidancy, like, because I was like, I'm not letting any person in their right mind have the power to do that to me again. And I kind of went too far the other way, which was terrible, but makes me a fantastic relationship counselor, because I can tell you on healing both from a nuanced perspective. Now, I do want to talk about this list, because I remember this was something that I struggled with, because I would read the secure attachment list when I was first doing the inner work myself before I was a relationship counselor, and I would read it and it would actually not empower me to do anything, because I would be like, I'm doing all this work, I'm working on all these things, but this still seems like this perfect person that I can never attain to be. And that's my problem with it. I'm not saying that the list of like secure attachment behaviors is bad. I'm saying that the lists that are kind of taken and pushed out onto Instagram create this Barbie world effect that misses the human experience, that makes us think that this is some unattainable thing that we can't achieve, and this person never feels these things, and they communicate with such ease and grace, and they just love. And I have heard myself, I have heard my clients, and I have heard my friends say, I just wish I was secure attached. And we kind of pedestal it, because people who are securely attached still have relationship lessons, they still have relationship problems, they still have conflicts, they still have all these things. It's how they manage it that makes it so different. So on our little list, I'm going to read it out to you. I have my laptop here, excuse me. I really wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. But so the key characteristics of secure attachment. I have pulled this from the book Attached. So the book Attached is a credible book. It was the first thing that introduced me to attachment styles. So if you're wanting to understand a little bit more, it's great. However, it does miss some of the mark, in the sense that since the book was released, I want to see what year this book came out actually, because I know that studies came out in 2013. What year? Yes, so it came out in 2010. So in 2013, all this like information came out basically about how your attachment styles aren't fixed. So when you read it, it can kind of sound like a death sentence, or like this is your attachment style. And I'm not saying it's not a fantastic book. It really is. But there's a lot now that we know to do with the mind and working with the nervous system and working with the body, that we can make some changes. I mean, neuroplasticity. There's a lot we can do. So from this list, it says the key characteristics of secure attachment: comfortable with intimacy and independence. Securely attached individuals are not afraid of closeness or being alone. They can maintain their sense of self while being connected to others. Effective communication. They openly express their needs and feelings and listen to their partner's concerns without becoming overly defensive or anxious. Emotional regulation. They handle stress and relationship conflicts in a balanced way without excessive anxiety or avoidance. Trust and reliability. They trust their partners and expect to be treated with respect, creating relationships based on mutual care and understanding. Responsive to partners' needs. They can provide emotional support and reassurance when needed, while also expecting the same in return. No fear of abandonment or losing independence. Unlike anxious or avoidant styles, secure individuals are not preoccupied with fears of rejection or feeling trapped in relationships. Stable and long-lasting relationships. They tend to form healthy and long-lasting relationships, which I do agree with. Now, how securely attached people behave in relationships. They're comfortable expressing their feelings and asking for what they need. They don't play games or use manipulation in relationships. I do agree with that one. They naturally seek out and attract partners who treat them well. They can navigate conflict without escalating into extreme emotional reactions. Now, like I said, I'm not saying that any of this is wrong. It's right. It's great. But the lists often say when people insecure relationships, like they trust unconditionally. And that's not true. When I got to a more secure attachment style, I began to look at whether I could trust the person I was dating, whether we could have a secure attachment. So it's not like I instantly with every person, and I did do this at times, being like, I have to trust blindly. And like, that was just a shit show. Like, don't do that. At the start of your dating, you're really trying to learn, like, do you have the capacity and the qualities to build a secure relationship with me? That list in itself does have aspects that I would like to just bring up, I think. And securely attached people still have triggers and emotional reactions. Now, they may not spiral like into this extreme avoidance or this extreme anxiety because they've done a lot of work on it, but it can take people a second of being triggered and seeing the old pattern that they used to go down and being like, okay, that's what I used to pick in. This is this dysregulated option. I'm going to pick something that's healthier. And that still very much happens. It's more of an intentional choice rather than something that just naturally happens. And I think that that's the case for 99.9% of like secure people at this point, because most of us now, as like, if you're like myself and I was dating in my early 30s, like, you have enough bullshit that you've been pushed out of a secure attachment, even if you had the most perfect childhood, because it does develop in childhood. But if you go through relationship trauma, like being cheated on and stuff as an adult, that 100% can have a impact. The other thing I do have an issue with the list is that they say that like people communicate their feelings and needs well, and that's true, but that kind of paints this idea of like, hello, here's my needs, here's my da-da-da, and the other person being like, okay, thanks, honey. Like, that's not how it happens at all. Like, people can still have this vulnerability of sharing something new, of going to this new depth with this person, and it's that how they work with that discomfort again that is beneficial. They can still experience relationship challenges. People in secure attachments still experience lessons, and they still feel hurt, and they still have to process that hurt. I do think that there is something to be said that as you work more towards a secure attachment, you tend to get better at feeding out and not paying attention to these dynamics that maybe once served you or served something within you that you don't necessarily experience as like extreme highs and lows because of the relationship you've built internally with yourself, that you're like, I'm not doing this. But again, it doesn't mean that like they never need reassurance 100%. And particularly in times of stress, like I think if I could say that and make it feel any more normalized or human, because I also in my year off went through a pretty major surgery, which I wasn't expecting. And I had done so much work on myself and was in this really healthy, secure, happy relationship. Please don't pedestal it. It's still a normal relationship with its challenges and everything. I'm just using it as a reference point from where I came from. It's so interesting because in my journey of going through this really stressful thing of like a lot of uncertainty and this surgery, I saw my avoidancy coming up quite a bit because I was dealing with things a lot larger than my nervous system necessarily knew how to handle. So it wanted to default back. It wanted to go back. And I think that times of stress really do change a lot for people, and that's okay. They even say with attachment styles, like when you move in together, when you get engaged, and when you have a baby, like they all kind of come up again as well. But yeah, I mean, everything comes up when we're stressed, right? Our nervous system's already dysregulated. Like it's so much easier to see the pattern that we used to take when you're already in that dysregulated state. It's so funny because, yeah, even like for me, like I got massively insecure. I got a scar on my belly, and like it's on my belly, but even like with that, I've just had so much fucking insecurity. Like you should have seen me like last week. I got like my fake eyelashes done, like I had fake tan on and my nails done, and it was like, you know, when you're just reaching for everything outside yourself, like in the hopes that it helps, and it did slightly, but I've also known that that was a short-term fix and I had to go inwards. Shit, I love a rant. Next, they might not always get it right immediately. Even securely attached people can sometimes react in ways they regret or fail to meet their partner's needs in the moments. They make mistakes. Gottman's research, I did a lot of work with them in like my recovery and a lot of study with them, and it was fantastic. And I will say this, like even like in the like most successful relationships. So if you don't know, Gottman's basically, they followed these couples in a like really longitude study and multiple times, and like what it's allowed them to do is kind of figure out what's like what people have healthy, happy relationships, what level of people have long-lasting but dissatisfactory relationships, and what level had like volatile or dysfunctional relationships that ultimately were going to divorce or end. And even in the people that were like the most happy, they found like the ratio of like 1 to 5 interactions, so 1 negative to 5 positive. So they're still going to make mistakes. You're still going to say things that maybe you shouldn't have, or like you're still going to trigger things in your partners, particularly because you don't necessarily know what your partner's wounds are at the start, and they don't know what yours are either. You don't even know what yours are. I will say that your partner does not know what your triggers and wounds are at the start, because you don't even. Like, I had done so much work on my triggers and wounds on my own that, and then I remember like there were a couple of times where stuff came out and I was like, this, like I'm processing this again in this way, like what? Like, yeah. So anyway, they have emotional needs and expectations. So sometimes I find like this book like implies that securely attached people endlessly are patient, but in reality we all have like limits to our nervous system and boundaries and stuff like that. So now that I have picked apart everything that I just don't love on attachment styles, not that I don't love about attachment styles, but my issues with secure attachment, because I think that if you read that list and you're someone who's coming from an insecure attachment style and you're doing a lot of work on yourself, it's very disheartening. It's very isolating. Like you think like it's this Barbie that's just does all this stuff with ease, and I don't think any relationships, particularly like long marriages, are easy. It's just more about like, you know, like those things on Instagram where it's like, pick your hard, like being unfit is hard, going to the gym is hard, pick your hard. Well, that's kind of, I think as well, a little bit of the effect. Like, can't believe I'm chugging Red Bull at now 10:20 in the morning. Very unlike me. So here's a couple of things that I would give you guys if I was to, knowing nothing about you, okay? Because I don't. This is a YouTube video, but I wanted to give something that, and create a list that ultimately anyone with any attachment style could come and use this list and take some tangible things and really like embody them and go out into the world. If you are someone that is watching this and you are like single, or you're in a relationship, or whatever it might be, this list will apply to you. You can find things on this list and really work on them and make some serious changes. However, I will say this, if you are single, it can be this bit of, I want to almost say poor advice, that if you're single and you have an insecure attachment or an avoidant attachment style, you should just date someone that is secure. And I want to talk about this because this is from learned experience of myself, and also where I've seen clients get to and been like, no. And I obviously understand how it feels to be that anxiously attached. And I also understand how it feels to be that avoidantly attached. But once I had done a lot of work on myself, did not want to date someone that had a lot of unconscious patterns when it came to their attachment style. Not because I was heartless, not because I didn't care for them, not because I couldn't relate to their experience, but because I had done so much work on myself that all I wanted was peace. I didn't care whether or not they were securely attached remotely. I didn't care if they were anxious. I didn't care if they were avoidant. What I cared about is, did they have the emotional capacity and the skills that they were doing something about it, that they were able to accept where they were and actually work on it. So if you're someone who's like watching this and you're like, I'm secure, are you? 100%. Because I think that there is far more benefit to yourself, actually being genuinely honest of where your attachment style is and taking your ego out of it and being able to own it. Because if you don't own it and you don't have the self-awareness about these things, then ultimately you're going to end up suppressing a lot, and it's going to come out, and you're not going to be able to naturally and actively work through something with a partner because you're constantly actually trying to hide your emotional state. Woo. Sorry, another rant. Anyway, what I was going to say is I found a study. I got to bring this up. I love this. If you're single and you're like, should I really go to this effort of working on my attachment style? I will do it when I'm in a relationship. I have something for you. This study found that individuals with insecure attachment styles, so when I'm saying insecure attachment styles, I mean like you're anxious, you're avoidant, you're disorganized, and they reported lower sociological well-being and higher distress regardless whether or not they were in a relationship. So not working on your attachment styles isn't just impacting your relationships, it's impacting your entire way of relating to the world and the way that you view things and have emotional distress. This study also said, which I wrote down, nothing to do with what we're talking about right now, but while being in a relationship was generally associated with better well-being, the quality of attachment mattered more than the relationship status. So please don't ever think, oh, thank God they have someone, because whether or not that relationship is happy or not is better than whether they're single or not. I think we know that now anyway. We're seeing a lot more people actively choose to be single, not by choice, but because they would rather be alone than deal with nonsense, which kudos to you. Securely attached individuals where the single to partner had higher levels of physiological well-being, whereas insecure attachment styles experience distress even when in relationships. So yes, and that is, I'll put it in the description just so I can reference that. And you guys know I'm not talking out of my ass. I've started referencing a lot of my work and even on my Instagram posts and my social media posts. And the reason that I'm kind of doing that is not because I believe that the research is like the be all and the end all when it comes to relationships. Research and like humans learn from each other, particularly in the area of relationships. Like we know to study it because of our behaviors and the human psychology of the things that we're witnessing and experiencing and what our internal innate wisdom is saying to us. But I think when it comes to then taking that and putting it onto the online space, I want to make it very clear that this isn't a projection or something I decided to make up, and be very honest with you guys when it is a personal experience thing, because that's what I found disheartening and made me take a break. So anyway, that's just my new way of doing things. Enjoy. Sorry, this list. Number 1, strengthen your emotional self-awareness. When I say strengthen your emotional self-awareness, this is where it gets tricky, because if you asked me when I was very securely, anxiously, avoidantly attached, if I had self-awareness, I would say yes. Yes, I did. And that's because my ego wanted to. But did I have the best self-awareness? Probably not. I think that there is so much power in having the self-awareness of where you're currently truly at, like I said, and being really honest with yourself, but then also starting to pick up on micro behaviors. Like when you do something, really sit with like, what was my intention of doing that? Why am I doing that? Like it took me so long to recognize I had a little voice in my head that was like secretly trying to control my relationships, because I had realized I had never felt safe or secure in my life. And that by not being controlling, but micromanaging what happened in the relationship, I thought that I was not going to get hurt. And guess what? It just made me be a bitch sometimes, and I did get hurt. Anyway, so this is all about basically finding your emotional triggers. Like what are my triggers? What are my common reactions? What do I do? Like really nut out, like examining yourself. The second one is build emotional regulation skills, because there also was a study that I will bring up. And it basically said that working on like emotional regulation skills, which is honestly things like breath work, like meditation, even like doing like somatic therapies and doing all these things where you can learn to emotionally regulate better, even in like working on your daily stress, will give you the tools that when you're then anxiously or avoidantly working with being dysregulated, you're going to trust those tools. So this study basically found like the power of how emotional regulation skills can really help change your attachment styles. this one is interesting. So like engage in rituals of connection. I wanted to say this because like rituals, it sounds so woo-woo. I don't mean it to, but like when I was doing the study with like Gottmans, they were very adamant about like the bids for connection, that, you know, and how much like when someone says like, oh my God, look at my Red Bull, isn't this funny? And like whether or not the partner like looks up from their phone, or whether they like look at what they're doing, even if they think it's like not actually that interesting, but they turn towards the relationship. And then like in times of conflict as well, like you kind of turn towards a relationship. You're like, this sucks. This is really hard, but I'm going to choose the healthiest option here. I'm going to choose what's going to do my dynamic the best. And it's basically this entire like choosing and this choice, and it's very much a muscle. So I think if you can start to work on that outside of arguments and outside of being dysregulated, and just being really conscious and aware of that, then that's going to kind of set you up for success. The next thing I would do is learn how to repair after conflict, because I think that when we are anxiously or avoidantly attached, we can assume that if we're more anxious, that conflict means fear of abandonment. And if we're more like avoidantly attached, we can definitely avoid conflict a lot more, go into hiding when we are dysregulated. So work on your conflict and work on understanding that conflict is a tool for growth, and that, you know, you've got options to work through your dysregulation. Have a look at, okay, like if I was in an argument, how am I going to like communicate this better? All of that kind of stuff. So this one is really interesting. And it's not going to make sense to you guys when I say it like this, but rewire negative sentiment override. This basically, in language to you, is we all have a lens that we see our relationships with. And this was the biggest change I noticed when I started to work towards a more secure attachment. The lens in which we see our relationship is often defined by our beliefs, our values, and our past experiences. And the more that we can begin to work through unprocessed stress, unprocessed trauma, unprocessed past relationships, and really remove that from our nervous system and the way that our body stores things, the more we're going to start to see the relationships that come in front of us just as that relationship by itself. When we don't do that, and when we have that lens on, we can mistake positive and neutral interactions. We'll automatically assume like that it's a negative experience when it's not. Have a look at like yourself, have a look at your awareness. Like, am I assuming the worst in people? Am I looking at this like for what it is? And I understand there's always going to be a level of like, hey, I need to learn from this love bombing, or I need to learn from this experience, and 100% have awareness about it. But I think that you will find, as did I, and as I have with a lot of clients and friends, that there can be a lot of bleeding onto the wrong people. So you need to know, when is it serving me and when is it like a hypervigilance and a reactionary thing. Practice giving and receiving support. This is my last one, and I love this because secure attachment thrives on healthy independence and interdependence, and it's a dance. And particularly now, if you're in your late 20s, early 30s, whatever, we have gotten very good at being very independent. Learning how to have interdependence in a healthy way is so key, because when we can be anxiously attached, we can want that person to just like soothe all of our emotional states and fix our emotions, and like, I'm feeling something, help me, because we don't know how to necessarily handle it. And then someone who is more like avoidantly attached will kind of almost like go into hiding when they're activated and shut the other person out because they're dysregulated and process it on its own. Learning how to have this, okay, how can I work on moving towards a healthier way of this independence, depending on what side of the fence you're on. I know some of this is very vague in the sense, but at least I think it's like goals. Like, if you take these things as goals, then that's 100% like the best way to do it. Immediately after this, I've got a course I'm doing that I'm putting out, and it's called like Me to We. And it's very much for people who are like myself and didn't have healthy role models growing up, and how to unlearn and process a lot of that stuff I was saying, and then how to build healthy relationship skills to move towards more securely attached relationships. But it also goes much deeper than that and talks about pattern recognition and But I'm very excited, because that I think is going to be a fantastic tool that's going to make this work so much more accessible to everyone, rather than wanting to just feeling like you just need to work with me directly. So that's going to be very exciting. But for now, I think that's a really good starting point for you guys to go off into the world and make some positive changes. I'll put it in the caption. That way you can come back at any time and read it or take a screenshot, whatever you want. Anyway, that's it for me, my loves. That's all I had to say on today's little ranty rant. But I will be back. I've very thoroughly enjoyed this. I've very thoroughly enjoyed researching a lot of this. And this is like mental gymnastics for me of like pulling out my education, finding research, and then also putting it in a very nuanced perspective that hopefully makes you feel a little bit less alone, because that's how we help work through people that might feel like they have some relationship trauma. Number one thing, baby, empowerment, because you can change it. I changed it, and I'm not special. I'm just got so sick of my own shit that I had to do something about it because everyone else was sick of it too. Anyway, have a fantastic day. Let me know in the comments if the 10 people that are probably watching this, for the 10 people in the comments that are probably watching this, thank you. And let me know what you guys want me to talk about next, because I love a good deep dive, and I would love to get to a point where I can just give you guys information for free where possible.